This is Akashvani. In the program Spotlight, now we bring you a discussion on G-20 Development Ministers Meeting. The participants are Ashok Sajjanhar, former diplomat, and S. Rangabhashyam, anchor.
The G20 Development Ministers Meeting is underway in Varanasi, which is basically a 3-day event from the 11th to the 13th of June. And in this particular meeting, lots of things will be discussed which would be relevant to all the member countries of the G20, and not only the member countries but the entire humanity. To discuss the issues and the entire gamut of issues related to this particular meeting, we have with us Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar. Mr. Sajjanhar, a warm welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, sir.
Mr. Sajjanhar, to put things in perspective, tell us about the main agenda and the main points which will be discussed in this particular meeting of the G20 Development Ministers.
There was a meeting of the Development Working Group that took place recently, earlier this month in New Delhi, and the issues that were discussed in that meeting are also going to be taken up here. If I could make one point, and you said that very correctly, that of course the discussions and the decisions that emanate from the meetings of the G20, they will not be relevant only for these limited number of countries, 20 countries, but basically their maximum impact, their major impact will be on about 180 countries, most of them developing ones, who are not really represented at the negotiating table when the G20 members meet. To come to this development ministers meeting that taking place in Varanasi, I think there are two particular aspects that have been identified, that have been flagged, which are going to be discussed in great detail. One is the issue of reform of multilateralism. We have seen that unfortunately multilateral institutions have not been able to acquit themselves very creditably in recent times. Basically because these institutions were, whether it is the United Nations, the UN Security Council, it is the WTO, it is the World Bank, it is the World Health Organization, all these institutions were created in the aftermath of the Second World War. So they represent the reality of the situation that has existed at that time. Of course, after 75 years, 78 years, the situation in the world is very, very different. For instance, India was, as an economic power, a non-entity when the United Nations was established in 1945 or when India became independent in 1947. But today it has emerged as a big economy, $3.5 trillion, fifth largest economy, fastest growing economy, slated to become the third largest economy by the end of this decade. So there are many changes that have taken place, and of course the world needs to come to terms with the reality as it exists today. So one issue is reform of the multilateral institutions and how can that be done so that global governance can be made more effective. And the second one is to deal with the issue of climate change, which has really become an existential threat as far as the world is concerned. Of course, we need to keep in mind that all the environmental pollution and that we see around, whether it is in air, whether it is on water, whether it is on land, this is a contribution of the developed countries, because the developed countries in their process of development have polluted the air, the lakes, the seas, and the rivers. But now it is, as it is called, it's a common but differentiated responsibility. So all the countries are meeting, they will discuss all these issues. And one initiative that is going to come up for particular discussion and attention and focus is what is known as Mission Life. Life, L-I-F-E, which stands for Lifestyle for Environment. This was an initiative that was launched by Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Modi when he participated in the COP26. COP stands for the Conference of the Parties, under one of the UN agencies dealing with United Nations Environment Program. So the 26th meeting of all these countries took place in Glasgow in the United Kingdom in November 2021. And that is where Prime Minister Modi had launched this idea of LIFE. And the thought behind Mission LIFE is that all individuals, communities, societies, countries, they need to take this issue up personally, become real-time stakeholders and change their lifestyle so that they are able to go on for a more sustainable way of living so that it doesn't have an adverse impact as far as the global climate is concerned.
Ambassador Sajanhar, you made a mention about climate change, its impact, and also the thought of, reducing our carbon footprint across the world. I'm sure you'll agree that, the main bone of contention between developed countries and developing countries, that developing countries are arguing that in your time you grew by leaps and bounds without thinking about carbon footprint. But now when the chance has come for developing countries to grow in leaps and bounds using industrial revolution, now you are saying that we also need to bring down our carbon footprint. So when will we grow? How will we develop if all these restrictions are imposed on us? So that is a valid point, and that is also a stumbling block which needs to be clarified, isn't it?
No, you're very right. And that is why, this at the Kyoto Protocol in the late 1990s, this whole idea of what is known as the CBDR, common but differentiated responsibility, that the whole world has to assume responsibility, but obviously it is differentiated because, as you said very rightly, as the arguments that are being made by developing countries, they are absolutely right that during their own process of development, currently developed countries, they have really polluted the atmosphere. They are the ones who have created this climate change. The global warming has been done by them. So morally, they cannot tell developing countries that they should not to go that path. But of course, now there are possibilities of going in for renewables, and whether it is the solar energy, and in that context, India launched the initiative of what is known as the International Solar Alliance at the COP21 that took place in Paris in 2015. And today there are more than 100 countries which are members of the International Solar Alliance. And the idea is that the solar energy is coming to us free of charge. And if we can harness it and if we can store it, then it can be used in place of fossil fuels. But of course, the challenge is huge. We need new technology in terms of storing it, and of course, infrastructure, putting in place the infrastructure for the solar energy, for harnessing solar energy. That also is an expensive proposition. Although now we have seen that solar energy, the manufacture of solar energy, the costing has come down. It is below the energy that is created through oil, through crude oil, also at times through gas, but maybe not as competitive as far as coal is concerned. So yes, that is a challenge, and it was decided also at the COP21 in Paris that the developed countries would provide finance of $100 billion every year to developing countries so that they are able to put in the right kinds of technologies so that the environmental pollution is arrested, it doesn't take place.
Yeah.
Also, it was agreed that the developed countries would provide technology at concessional rates to developing countries. Unfortunately, none of these has been observed by developed countries, and some of the reasons we can speak about, we can think about that the last 3-4 years have been particularly difficult for the global economy and even for developed countries. We have seen whether it is the COVID-19 pandemic that has adversely impacted the economies of all countries, including developed countries, and also now the Russia-Ukraine war. That has also had a very deleterious impact on the economies of all countries. So they have not been able to provide this funding and financing. But of course, it needs to be done if developing countries are to pursue the path of green energy and renewable energy.
Ambassador Sajjanhar, one of the main sessions is on multilateralism. Whether we talk of the Bretton Woods twins, the World Bank, or the World Health Organization, or any of these organizations, even in a larger context, have not been really successful in bringing about the kind of change which was expected to be brought about in the entire world. What is the way forward? Do you think now we need to have smaller groups, for example BRICS or a SARC kind of arrangement, or ASEAN, and then maybe focus on these multilateral institutions, whether it is for funding like the BRICS Bank or Asian Development Bank, or to address other issues of, say, the global supply chain or health for that matter? What would you say? What is the way forward?
Yeah, I think you raise very many important points, and you are very right that the multilateral institutions have not been able to equip themselves creditably. And one of the reasons for that definitely is that they do not represent the reality as it exists on the ground today. And you are very right as far as the World Bank, the Bretton Woods institutions, the WTO, etc., that they definitely need reform. We have seen as far as the World Trade Organization is concerned that 3 years ago in 2019, its dispute settlement process was completely came to a grinding halt because the United States under President Donald Trump was not willing to agree to the names of members of the appellate body. So that has also become quite dysfunctional. And you're very right when you said that the WHO is not working, because we saw that in early 2020 when the COVID-19 pandemic, when that was spreading, the WHO was not really effective in sending out messages to control this. The multilateral trading system needs reform. This is what India has been arguing for, and this will be an issue that will be discussed. Now, to the second question of, you said whether we need smaller bodies like you mentioned BRICS or ASEAN. I don't think that is the way forward. I'll tell you why. Because BRICS is too small an entity, both in terms of number of countries. There are just 5 countries, and they might, if the total GDP of the world is about $100 trillion, they might represent about 20 trillion. So that's a very small proportion. ASEAN, in any case, 10 members, 550 million population, about $3 trillion economy. So, whatever they decide amongst themselves, they will not really be able to have an impact on the world. The real institutions that we need to see, my first option would be to reform the United Nations system. All countries need to get together. But a second fallback would be institutions like the G20. Because G20, you would recall, has also come in place because of a felt need. In 2007-2008, we had this international economic and financial crisis. So in 2007, they decided to bring these 20 countries together, 19 countries plus the European Union. And they represent 85% of the global GDP, 75% of the global trade, and about 67% of the global population. So I think these are, in a sense, more representative organizations. Since multilateral institutions, particularly the UN institutions, are not functioning properly, we have these small groupings, which you might call plurilaterals or minilaterals, which are coming around in the world.
Ambassador Ashok Sajjanhar, it's been a pleasure having you in this program. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ranga.
You were listening to a discussion on G20 Development Ministers Meeting. The participants were Ashok Sajjanhar, former diplomat, and S. Rangabhashyam, anchor. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani. You can listen to it on our mobile app News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel News on AIR Official. You may share your feedback about this program through email at airnsdtalks@gmail.com or WhatsApp on 928909444.